Welcome everyone to this OneTest Performance open mic session on Datasets versus Datapools. We have with us who's going to be presenting Paul Liskay from our support team. And if you can, please post any questions you have in our chat window and we'll try to answer them during the session. And then at the end, we're going to open up to audible questions to the team. But any questions you have during the session, go ahead and post in the chat. And let's go ahead and get started. Off to you, Paul. Thank you.
I'm Paul Liskay. I'm currently in the level 2 support for the HCL OneTest tools for the Americas Studio. I started with IBM and Tivoli, I think in the 90s and 2000s. And I joined the Rational software brand at that time in 2009 for the Rational Performance Tester tool. I was on the system test team for releases 8.0, 8.1, and 8.2. And then in 2012, I joined level 2 support for the Rational tools, including Rational Performance Tester. And then in 2016, I joined HCL Software, and I currently support the HCL OneTest tool suite. So starting with 9.5 for OneTest Performance, we replace Datapools with Datasets. And if you use Datapools, they had 3 open modes: shared, private, segmented. And Datasets, they have, again, 3 modes that are slightly different, except private is pretty much the same. There are differences. Functionally, everything that we could do in Datapools, we can now do in Datasets. The implementation is easier to understand conceptually. And to share data in the past, we had to use one of these segmented per machine access modes, which meant we had to use agents. When we use data sets, when it's optional to use agents, we do not have to use agents. So it's just easier to implement and understand how to share data using data sets versus the old method of Datapools. So I do have a sample project. So instead of just looking at it on the slide, let me jump to the project that I have already set up. So to use data sets, obviously we need a data set. So I made one that's simple, 1 column, 8 rows, and I just put the row 1 through 8, so we know which row we're using. I have a simple test, and this test we just hit a quality server examples page. It's what it hits really doesn't matter, but what I did was I substituted the page name with the data set value. You can see it's substituted from column 1 of the data set. So when I play back the test, if I want to know which data set value row I'm fetching at playback time, all I have to do is look at the page name of the event log. You can dive into the test log if you wanted to, but this is, I found, the easiest way to, if you're going to experiment with data sets, to see which value was retrieved at playback time. Just substitute the page name with the data set row. And then when we have cover the modes for among virtual users, I have a simple schedule. And it's here, I call it 2 users because it has few users. I like imagination. But so 2 virtual users, 1 simple test that loops 4 times, and 1 data set with 8 rows. Okay, so let's go back to the slide deck. So what I'm going to focus on is these 2 options right here, the open mode and the access mode. So I'm going to cover the open mode first. There's 3 of them. The first one is the shared per test execution. And what this means is, regardless of how many virtual users you have, they're going to share from the same data set. So if one user gets row 1, another virtual user could get row 2, etc. They won't get the same row unless the data set wraps. And there's no guarantee when you play back a schedule with multiple virtual users which row each virtual user is going to get, because it depends on the timing when the request is made by the virtual user. So let's jump back to the test again. And so for the data set, the way you specify it and a test is you go to here, it's under common options. So if you have other options already set, you can't find data sets, just go to common options. You can add a data set. I already added one, but let's look at the properties. And that brings up the open mode and the access mode. So for now, let's just look at the open modes. Again, there's 3 of them. This is the default settings, shared per test execution, and sequential. And it's going to wrap in case I need more than 16 requests, from the data set. But since I have 2 virtual users and this loops 4 times, I'm going to make exactly 8 requests to the data set. So for this, let's cancel this one. Okay, so this is saved, and let's run the schedule. So my expectation is, one other thing I did, I set the current row to 5 just to be a little bit different, just to show that that's something we can do. And data sets, you can, with an enhanced editor, you can configure which row is going to be the current one. So for this demonstration, I set it to 5. So my expectation is with 2 virtual users, one of them is going to get 5. Either one or the other 2 is going to get 6. And then when the other virtual user requests the next one, they're going to get 7. So this is just going to be accessed sequentially. So let's see how that works. So 2 users in my schedule. I'm going to run the schedule. It actually takes a little bit longer for the schedule to launch than it does to execute, but it just take about 30 seconds. Now, usually if you have a standalone test, you can watch the page name, but with a schedule, since we have multiple virtual users, you would have to pick which virtual user to watch, right? Because this test is so short, by the time I configure which virtual user to watch, it's done. Okay, so in this case, to see which rows each virtual user actually received at playback time, I would have to look at the test log. And the test log, you have to go to the results, and you have to right mouse click, go right there, display the test log, and click on events. And then we have to sync up, make sure we have the protocol data tab synced up when we have the test log. Now, when we explore the test log, we can see the protocol data at playback time. And I'm going to click on virtual user 1. So we see virtual user 1 got 5, 8, 2, and 4. And if I click on virtual user 2, we got 6, 7, 1, 3. So shared per test execution, this data was shared among the 2 virtual users. They got the rows sequentially. That was my access mode. And you can tell there's, like no virtual user got number 6 twice or something. So, and you can't guarantee the order. It wasn't like 5 and then 6 for the other one and 7 for this one. So like I said, it all depends on the timing when the actual was made. The properties is, again, I use shared per test execution sequential. And that's the default, and that's the easiest to understand and to use. So let me hit cancel, and the next open mode is going to be private. Now what private means is each virtual user gets its own copy or logical copy of the data set. So when we play back the same schedule, if we would have picked this one using private, then when I play this back, I would expect virtual user 1 to get 5, 6, 7, 8, and virtual user 2 to get 5, 6, 7, 8 because they think they have a private, what they do, they have a private view into the data set. So if you look at, I'm just going to save a little bit of time and show a result that I played back earlier. So if you look at the test log where it has the schedule with private mode set, again, I think the current row was 5. So virtual user 1 got 5, 6, 7, 8, and virtual user 2 got 5, 6, 7, 8 because they each have a private view into that data set. So what one virtual user, when you use private, doesn't have any effect or bearing on what the next row, the other virtual user receives, because they have their own private view. The next one is a nice enhancement. It's shared for all test executions. And what this does is if you have disposable data that in your data set, they can only be used one time. With Datapools, users would do is they actually had to go and edit the data pool and delete the rows that couldn't be used anymore and maybe add new values to the rows. With shared for all test executions, what this means is you can play back a test, and let's say in my case, I ran 5, 6, 7, 8. Then if I run the test again, it would remember where I left off, and then would fetch rows 1, 2, 3, and 4. So it's if you have a schedule or a test that again has data that can only be used one time, if you use share for all test executions open mode, then we don't have to edit the data set to delete the rows that are no longer valid or no longer desired to be used. So let me demo that one to you. And let's see. Again, I'm just going to use a result that I ran previously. So this one was a standalone test. And the first time I ran it, I used, when I ran this test, this mode, and I used sequential. And let's see, this one. Okay. So I ran the test, standalone test, shared for all test executions. I got 5, 6, 7, 8. And then I ran the same test about 45, 30 seconds later, 90 seconds later. Exact same test, nothing's changed. And my expectation was it should start, it should wrap. I should have gotten rows 1, 2, 3, and 4. And let's go to the test log. And I did, I got 1, 2, 3, and 4. So that's the 3 open modes. Let me go ahead and close these results. Close to the right. Let me go back to the PowerPoint. And now we're going to talk about access modes. I'm going to keep, when I demo these, I'm going to keep shared for test execution as the open mode. So we have 3, sequential, random, shuffled. And we've seen sequential, so I won't demo that one. Random's kind of fun, and it just, it's exactly what we think it means. It would pick a row randomly from the data set. But what it also means is we can get the same row multiple times because it's a random selection. So let me show that one to you. So we're going to change my properties to random, shared for test execution, because it really doesn't make sense to pick up where you left off if you use random. I'm going to change the loop to 16. And I'm going to save my test. And I'm going to run this one. I'm going to hit no. I could change perspective, but I'm lazy because if you change it, you have to change it back if you want to edit the test. Okay, this thing finished faster before it could actually update the event log. So what I'll do is look at the test log, and bingo. So I made 16 random requests into the data set, and let's see, 4, 5, 6, 7. It didn't pick 1 through, it did pick a range, but notice there's no 1 wasn't chosen, 3 wasn't chosen, picked a lot of 5. And that's just, you can chalk that up to randomness. If I had a bigger sampling of maybe if I looped 32 times or 64, eventually, probability-wise, I would have gotten each row, but this is how the random access mode works. And let's see. So let me cover the next one, which is going to be shuffled. And let's go to for shuffled. I'm going to change it to 8, which is just the exact number of rows in my data set. And I'm going to change this one to shuffled. And let's see. I'm going to save this one. And what shuffle does for us, it's sort of like random, except that you won't get the same row twice. You'll pick one row. It's just like a deck of cards. If I took this data set and shuffled it, the first row may actually have like row 3 as a value. The next one may be row 6. The value for the third access may be row 1. But it won't be, I won't get the same value twice. It's just, I will get 8 distinct values, but once it fetches 1, it won't fetch that value again unless we have to do a wrap of the data set. So let me show you the shuffled. Run test. No. Again, 8 rows. So instead of getting row 1, row 2, row 3, I'm going to get a shuffled order. So there's the shuffled access mode. I got 8 distinct rows. I got one of each row eventually was a pain, and I didn't get each row twice. So that's the shuffle mode. Now, there are some firewall considerations, and it's not immediately obvious that that there is an additional port. It's buried in the pub, but it is in the publication. But when we specify the agent port 7080, and if you do window preferences test server, OneTest Performance will actually need 7081 as well. 7080 is still going to be used for the agents. 7081 is going to be used for the dataset server. If you go all the way to the end of the URL, you can see we're using 7081. So if you have a firewall that you had to open for port 7080 to get an agent to communicate with OneTest Performance workbench, we also need to open port 7081. If you don't, then at playback time, the agents won't be able to receive the next data set. So again, just remember, you can whatever port you specify here, the default is 7080. We need 7081 open as well if there's a firewall in place. And there's a simple test to do this. Okay, this browser is actually on another machine, and a simple firewall test I have customers do. Let's make pretend this browser is on an agent machine and their agent doesn't communicate, or they have data set problems. The first thing I recommend is check for a firewall. You can do that easily with a browser. So if I get this, and if I wanted a more pretty form of it, this tells me if this is an agent machine that one, my workbench is running, it's listening at 7080. The fact that I got a response means there's no firewall between the browser, between the machine that this browser runs on and the workbench. And the test for the firewall for 7081 is real simple. Just change the port. Now, we don't have a fancy hello world or anything, but the fact that we did get a response instead of a timeout or any other type of message means there is no firewall blocking 7081 between this machine and the workbench. And from the previous test, 7080. So this is what you want. If you start having, if you're just moving up to using data sets, or you just installed an agent and you had to open the port for 7080, we also need to open the port for 7081. And another way, there's probably another issue that could pop up. It's kind of rare, but I've seen it happen a couple of times. If another program is listening on port 7081, and then when you start the OneTest Performance, if OneTest Performance can't bind to 7081, well, it can't serve the dataset request. So the easiest way to see if the workbench can bind to 7081 is just bring up the workbench tool. Close this one. Let's close this one. And if the CSV editor pops up, then the workbench can bind to 7081. So, but if we couldn't bind to 7081, this would not come up. It would just spin. And then if this doesn't come up, then we can't, test can't receive dataset requests. So 2 sample tests, make sure the workbench can bind to 7081, and make sure if you're using an agent behind the firewall that there's no firewall blocking 7081 as well as 7080. That's also another good practice. It's always upgrade to the latest version of OneTest Performance. You get the latest features, and you also get the latest fixes. We're continuing to make enhancements. If you use a earlier version, for example, of OneTest Performance, you'll notice the enhanced dataset editor has changed a little bit, but so this is the latest version. So again, you get the latest bug fixes and the latest enhancements. One other thing on the datasets is you do not have to use the enhanced editor. If you do open with, you can edit it here within the workbench if you wanted to. And I think there's settings for the system editor, in-place editor, etc. But the CSV editor is the enhanced one. And that's the easiest and one with the most features. References, okay, let's just bring these up in a browser, which I already have the bookmarks for. Okay, we actually have a knowledge article on the various open modes for datasets, and the link is in the PowerPoint slide. So if you want to play with datasets on your own and create a simple project and know how the various modes work, you can follow this as kind of a tutorial. And you notice this was done at 9.5 version at the time, and this is what the dataset editor looked at that time. So you can see we continually made enhancements to it. So if you want to play around with datasets and duplicate this project, you can just go to this knowledge article. Our product documentation, let me make this big. If you want to dive deep into the details and how to create datasets and edit and associate, et cetera, here's the link to the product documentation. And I use the 10.1.1 level. Like, again, best practice, always try to use the latest release. And I save that one for the end. Okay, if you want to know what bugs or enhancements or features are in each release, if you go to the release notes, which again, I gave the link to you, you can find the enhancements and so forth. And if you want to know if you're hitting an issue, a defect, or maybe what you think is a defect, check the release document. So if you're in like 10.1.0 and you're hitting a defect, go find the 10.1.1 release document, and maybe the defects has been fixed. And then it's just a matter of upgrading, and bingo, the issue is resolved. And we also have, let's see, the release document. This is a direct link from the release notes, I think. Let's see, PowerPoint. Yeah, so if you go to known issues, I started here, you go there, then you get the release document. If you want to look at the release document all by itself, that's what this link is. And we do have all types of resources available for you: documentation, webinars, project pages, articles, and we do have a forum. So if I were to click on the OneTest Performance forum, you can ask questions and answers, or search it. Maybe somebody asks the same question on the topic that you have in mind, and bingo, that's already answered. So you can ask something in the forum, but if you have a issue and you need support, open a ServiceNow ticket, and we'll be happy to help you. And then for the we like your feedback on these open mics. We're shooting to have one per quarter. This is our second one. So the next quarter, we'd like to know which topics you would like a session on, and it could be any of the OneTest products. It doesn't have to be just OneTest Performance. And let us know which version you're using. If you give us the topics that you're interested in, then we can gear the next open mic sessions towards that topic. Okay, so we're opening it up for questions.
Yes, thank you, Paul. That was very informative. We've answered a couple of questions in the chat window, but if you want to unmute and ask your question verbally, we are here, and we'll do our best to answer. So the latest question I see is, for all test executions, is there a way that I can reset the counter? For example, after a couple of runs, the counter went to 10,000. I'd like to reset it back to 1.
That's would be the go here, hit the little let's see, configure, and set the current row back to 1. And then save it. Don't forget to save it.
So did that answer your question, Lydia?
Yes, thank you.
I always forget, I set the current row, but then I forget to do the save. And then I get unexpected result. It's like, I set it, but it's not working like I wanted to. This, yeah, so like I said, you can set the current row. That's one feature of the enhanced CSV editor. Some customers would, and this is an option, but it's more tedious, and you can actually possibly corrupt the data set. But if you do Navigator, and I would just peek at the metadata, but if you mess this up, then you probably messed up your data set. You know, if I left off a bracket, but you can configure the current row here. You notice the data set editor changed it, right, to 1. It's safer, in my opinion, to set the current row using the data set editor, and then save it. And let's close this view. Hit the icon. So the current row should be 5. And it is.
All right, we have another question. what's the maximum data set row value that can be created? Like, so how big of a data set can we create?
I had a customer with over 100,000 rows, which is pretty big. But I don't think there's a, I don't know, I'm going to let the developer answer that one. Every time I try to answer it, I always say something wrong.
So there's not currently a max end, so I would guess is where you'd run into problems. And then a follow-on question from the same person. So one of the things about the new CSV data sets is that they are much more performant than the TP-TP data pools. You were severely limited in the size of your data pool from TP-TP because of memory, and it just couldn't load it. It tried to load it all into memory when you wanted to use it. And we don't do that. So it's much more performant, and you can have a much larger data set. As far as editing, so you can use Excel to do editing. You can have a CSV file that you generated in some other way, and you can import it. You can just copy the CSV file into place. You don't have to use our editor to create all of the rows in your editor, but currently you do have to create the rows one at a time.
And you could even use the data fabrication option in OneTest Server to generate lots of data very quickly.
You can also import, from a CSV file into the editor. So that's another feature that we have.
And so then the last question from the same person, having 100,000 rows, does it any impact during performance testing? So we did a lot of benchmarking with really large data sets. It was still really performant. We don't load the entire thing in. We just read from an input stream, so it should be not so much of an impact. The size shouldn't matter, hopefully, other than disk space.
Thank you.
I feel kind of strange asking and answering the questions. Does anybody else have anything they want to say?
Any more questions? Dawn, is there anything else you want to add to maybe whatever Paul covered? Okay.
I think we should have thought about it for the data fabrication. We could have given a quick show of that for the HCL call so that they could see that and how easy it is to generate data there, but another time.
Yep, another time, yeah. All right.
Yeah, the biggest, the most common issues we had initially, customers moving the data sets, was the additional port 7081 being blocked by firewall. So it's like I said, which OneTest Performance will show the agent port, and it is documented that we need one port, the next port after that one open. But so that's why I emphasize it in this presentation. But if there is a firewall, we need two ports open, not just one.
Okay, so there was another question. I didn't quite understand what was being asked, so I don't know if this person wanted to follow up, but it says, can you please explain built-in data sets with sequence number? So we have a built-in data source that is a sequence number, or you could create a data set, I guess, with some kind of numbering thing, but there's nothing built in to be able to create a data set with a sequence of numbers in it automatically for you, unless you use data fabrication. Does that answer that question, or?
That kind of brings up a good point. If you wanted to explore data sources, I could remove the substitution here from the data set, and I could substitute data source, no. And for built-in data source, it's this little icon. It's not related to this one or that one, so just click that one. And you can pick in a random number, and then you can specify the range. So this technique of substituting the page name, you can use it for data sets, but you can also use it if you wanted to see how other data sources work. And now I'm kind of interested. Let's see if this works. It'll work. Let's see what I get. There you go.
And Paul, it looked like there was a sequential option on that page where you chose random. There was a sequential option, so that might be of use.
Yeah, if you go click on, if you go here, then you can see the one that we generated, and then you can go to the properties, and you can configure, where it starts and the distribution and so forth, even the format. But
Right. She's talking about the one below that.
Yeah, if you close that dialog, the
If
one
you
right,
close that, there's another built-in data source called
That's sequential.
sequential number.
Yep. So that might be of help to somebody.
Yeah, let's remove substitution. Yes. Substitute. Select a data source. No. And click on this little icon, sequential number. And let's pick one between 12,000 and, I don't know, 16,000.
No. That's the step value.
So probably just
You
make
probably just want step value
16,001.
in one.
Yeah. There it goes.
That's how sequential works.
Yep.
I'm probably not the first person to figure out I can substitute something into the page title, but it's very useful for demoing and just exploring, like we're doing now with different built-in data values or data source values or even data set values, because you get instant feedback, right? If you substitute it in a big, humongous test, and you would have to dive into the test log, and depending how big the test log is, it's not very efficient. So if you make a little test like I did, it's just all it does is loop and just substitute the page title. You get instant feedback on what the value is.
All right. Well, we're coming at the end of our session, our scheduled time. Are there any further questions that we can answer? All right. I will take that as a no. And as I mentioned in the chat, I will be sharing the recording and the slides on this later today to everybody that registered. And if you have further questions and you have a client advocate, reach out to your advocate or reach out to me, and we will do our best to get you the answers that you need. Thank you all for attending, and have a good rest of your day.